Hi guys, welcome back. We're going to start off by kind of going right into the whole build of the chassis of the SLR here. The key thing, because most of all the body panels, the hood, front bumper, and then the main, general body of the Mercedes attaches directly to the chassis in order to mount. We have to get that kind of out of the way first, build the whole thing up so that we can start test fitting all of the body panels to make sure that they fit correctly, and then we can start kind of playing around with fit if there's any issues, which there most likely will be because of the fact that it's a resin kit. So moving along with some of the detail parts here in the Auber kit, we can see here that there's the sliders for the chairs. We'll probably get that all done later on because we're going to be adding different colored fabric color to the the inside of the chassis and to the seats. So these guys can wait a little while. But we've gone and taken the liberty here of cutting out the little mounts for the stock seats. Now they're this little U-shaped thing that was in here, and then we've used an assorted sizes. We got a wide one there and some smaller assorted sizes of chisels to scrape away the plastic, because with your normal sanding sticks, trying to get in here and get at it is a bit of a challenge. So what we've had to kind of do is cut up our sanding sticks here and mount them to a pair of hemostats in order to kind of get into this spot, because even with my fingers it's a little difficult to get into. And then once we removed those, we had some divots left over from the chisels, because it is still quite difficult to get our chisel in there nice and flat, so there was a little bit of gouging going on. So what we've done is we've taken some Mr. Surfacer 500, which is a thicker version of the Mr. Surfacer. The pigments are a little bit bigger in it, and it almost acts as like a little mini filler. So what we've done, if we can zoom in here, as you can see all these little dots here. Now those are all kind of indentations from where the chisel's gone in, and you could probably see some of the reflection there. So what we're going to do is basically fill, sand away, and then fill again and sand away until we get a nice smooth finish in there. Now we could use something like Bondo, but Bondo will dry relatively hard, so we want to have something that's a little bit lighter, and it's going to give us a nicer kind of fill in these thinner parts. And so Mr. Surfacer is kind of like the perfect solution to that problem. And most of the stuff back here isn't really going to be seen because the seats are going to be in there, but we just want a nice kind of smooth, even surface to mount our seat buckets to when it does come time to install them. So that's the reasoning behind that. You can see here in the instructions that they called out for those little nubs to be cut out, which we have. So we're going to kind of move along and get the base of the chassis kind of made, and hopefully we can start mounting up some body panels. So we'll start with that. Now here in the Tamiya instructions, it's calling out for us to install our struts here and the shock absorbers and suspension bits front and rear. We'll have to make some modifications to these guys, as it's calling us to cut the original shock absorber off and then mount a photo etch piece to. We can also see here that we're also to take care of these little carriers, these little kind of hoop things as well. So we're going to go ahead and cut those off of the original piece, and then we're going to install these little slabs in the back as well. So I'm going to find the screw to which it belongs. And where's my knife? Kniffy. So these were called out for sprue numbers. Sprue C. In here, and we're looking for Looking for 8 on the right side and 10 on the left. So we'll go ahead and do that now. Here's number 8. Where did I have that? There we go. So we're just going to kind of I know this is kind of difficult. I've tried to get as much lag in here as possible, but with black parts it is slightly difficult. So we've got the nubs in there. When we've cut the piece, for those of you that might not be familiar with the whole process, you want to not cut up directly to the piece, because what can happen is when you cut it, the polystyrene might actually pull out of where the nub is, which can create an indent, and we don't want that. So we just cut a little bit away and then go ahead and sand back down, make it nice and smooth. And the nice thing about the Tamiya plastics is they tend to be a little bit more glossy than most. So in the right light, if you look at it, you'll be able to see what you've sanded and what hasn't, because there's a matte and a glossy difference, which can also make sure you've got a nice smooth, the nub is gone and you've got a nice smooth surface there. We're just using some Flurry sanding sticks. We've got the blue one right here. It's just a medium coarseness, and we're using the finer side of it. There's a fine side, and then we've got a really coarse side. We're just using the fine side because there's not a lot of material that we need to remove. We just need to make sure it's nice and flush. So there's number 8. That's going on our left side. Just make sure I have the right part. Yeah. Going 8. We're going right in here. Now I tend to want to work through quickly with most of these, and as you can see here, and it's almost actually almost a snap fit into there, but we're going to make sure we're test fitting before we stick stuff in, just to make sure that there's no any debris in there. It doesn't look like there is, but there is a bit of resistance in the parts. We're gonna go over with their smoother sanding stick. Get rid of all these little mold lines on the edge of the parts. It's possibly making it hang up and not sit completely flush. Back in. Yeah, and that's sitting much nicer now, no gap. And so this looks like to me extra thin, but actually this is MEK, or methyl ethyl ketone. It's essentially a hotter, it's a base of Tamiya extra thin, but it's a lot hotter, so it works a lot faster. I've got proper ventilation in this room. So if you guys are interested in maybe using MEK for some quick, strong jobs, I'd suggest making sure that the room is well ventilated, because this stuff is toxic, and just take every necessary precaution. So we're going to go ahead and apply it in the joint. I'm doing it on the inside of the part, so that way if any of the glue seeps through, it doesn't give any, or if it changes the texture of the surface, we're not going to see it there on the outside. There are some pin marks here, some ejection pins. Those are on the inside though, so that's not a huge issue. So yeah, we're going to go ahead and move on to the next part here. Again, we're cutting not completely up close to the part, we're just cutting a little bit away from the sprue. And sand again. Take care of these while we're at it, because I know that was an issue on the other one. Here we go. It's always a nice satisfaction to know that, especially with Tamiya kits, it's almost a click and press sort of fit, similar to kind of how Bandai does a lot of their new Star Wars kits, where it's almost like a click fit. But this isn't a new toolkit, but it's relatively, you know, we're calling it in its mid 30s as far as life goes, where it's not a new kit, but it's not an old kit either. It's kind of somewhere in between. Okay, so we've got that installed there. Those are nice and well fitted. So we're gonna kind of skip the instructions here because these can be installed at a later date because of how the these suspension arms are and the amount of detail we're actually adding to the kit. It's almost kind of not necessary, so to say. Now, where to go from here? Let me see here, because we might actually be able to get away with putting the A-arms in beforehand and then sliding in the suspension arms afterwards. But let me just check ahead here and find out. Okay, so just having a look through the instructions here. Now, as far as installing the tub to kind of make it complete, we may not be able to install the bottom sway arms for both the front and the back, because it kind of pins in the wheel hubs to allow them to rotate, especially at the front, because they turn left and right, as well as the steering arm is kind of sandwiched in between the two halves with that little pinhole there. So we might have to leave the bottom section off, but we can go ahead and with the front especially, is we can go ahead and install the front shock arms, and we can do the rear as well. We just have to go ahead and, per the Auber instructions, is go ahead and remove the actual shock from the brace, both front and for the rear. Just to note that on those, especially the rear ones, I believe, these guys here, the actual hub is still attached, so we do need to hold on to those and possibly maybe with a pin or a knife kind of mark them left and right, so that way we don't mix those up. But for the front ones here, we should be able to go ahead and cut those out and mount them onto the front of the suspension, because then after that, essentially we can go ahead and start installing the engine placard on top of that, and then we just have to worry about reinstalling the shocks afterwards and the wheel hubs. So go ahead and do that. We'll start taking off. We've got part 15 is going to go on the 5, sorry. Well, those are for the rear. My bad. So 5 is going to go on the left. And 4 is going to go on the right. So we can go ahead. Here we have the piece. I know it's all black plastic, it's kind of hard to see. We're going to go ahead and remove this. Now, from looking at the instructions here on the front, we need to take off that front kind of section where it pins or hinges on the actual shock, which should leave us with a flat edge to kind of mount that photo etch to. So we're going to kind of, yeah, maybe we can zoom in a little bit closer and see. Yeah, I don't know if you guys can tell there, but there is a slight, right where that angle comes up here. Let's see if I can get a knife to kind of show. So right where this kind of edge meets up and then it goes around, that's probably a good indication of where we should cut. And that looks like it should be enough surface area for that photo etch piece to attach to. So we're going to come in with the sprue cutters first. And we're going to kind of go a little bit away from the edge so we don't take off too much material, because we wouldn't want to take off too much. Actually, it would probably be easier if we take the shock off first. Then we can go ahead and chop the rest of this off. Okay, so that should be enough there. Now we could, let's see how much this takes off. Okay, so that's relatively alright. That's enough material removed. Now we're just going to come out with the coarse side of our sanding stick here. Come in with the coarse side of our sanding stick, and then we should have a nice flat piece to attach the photo etch to. So we'll come back when that's all. Okay, so we've gone ahead and we've chopped our struts here. So these are the little blocks that are left over. We've got a nice little flat edge for the photo etch fret that's going to hold the shock absorber in place. We've got the rears done, and we also have the fronts also in place. And that's pretty much it as far as what we're going to be able to do on the suspension for right now. When we come back and do the shocks later, that's when we'll be adding a little bit more on there. So now we're going to kind of push ahead to the front, and we're going to work on the nice big engine placard here. So this essentially just sits in a couple of mounts. If I can find them. Sits in a couple of mounts in the front, and then pretty much everything is bolted onto it afterwards. So the hood's going to move on it. The headlights here mount in these little tabs. These little nubs are for the front bumper, so As you can see, it's almost essential that you build the chassis first before you start doing most of the body work, which will help you with fit issues later on down the road and get something nice and clean. So we're going to go ahead and start the construction of this. And so the interior of the wheel wells are going to fit into here. Oh, like so. Let's see if I get some more light down there. There we go. So these essentially just fit in there. Now there is that slight gap that's going to be present, and then we will have to tackle that because we want the kind of inside of there to be nice and clean. We might end up using, because there's such a complex curve and a complex shape in there, we might end up using a combination of things. We might end up using Mr. Surfacer, or we might end up just using some Bonded because that'll be quick and easy and get the job done. Now for that, because I want to try and get the sink in, I am going to use just regular Tamiya extra thin to set this. What it'll helpfully do with a slower set time is kind of drag the piece in to itself. And suck it all down, which will hopefully get rid of most of that gap. Now it's not get rid of it completely, but it will do enough of a job to help reduce the amount of work later on in that build. So we're gonna go grab the other wheel well part here and snip that from the tree. And because this part is sitting almost flush with the exterior of the body, we want to kind of create a nice tight gap. We're going to be switching over to the floor sticks. We're using the wider ones this time. Now these are the same grits as the smaller blue one. However, it's significantly wider, which doesn't flex as much. So it should give us a nice flat edge to work with. And essentially you could use sanding blocks with these as well. But this isn't super crucial. So we're just going to stick with sanding sticks. Be nice and work our way slowly down the grit to make sure it's nice and snug. Okay, and that's ready to be installed there. We're going to put a little bit of extra thin down on this part here just to give it a little something to start to tack to. And then that way we can fill in the rest of these seams. I'm just going to smooth off that edge there. Alright, so that's that. We're going to let this, we're going to put this aside for a little bit just so that we can make sure that everything kind of hunkers down. The glue does its job and starts to bond the two pieces together and start tightening up that gap for us automatically. And then we can kind of move on to the rear section. So because we've done these two struts, because they're going to be mostly hidden and it's just going to be a matter of threading the shock absorbers up in there. We're going to go ahead and I think we can mount the rear valence over top of that. You can permanently fix it on there, and then this way. So we'll just go again with the smaller sanding stick because we're working in a smaller area. You know, that might even be a little bit tight for that, so I'm just going to move with a scalpel. Be very careful. Just slowly shave away the plastic nub. And then when paint and stuff goes over top of that, shouldn't be a problem. We won't see that. Another one here. That's all good. We can go ahead and place this back here. Yeah, so that should be enough room to get in there and place what we need to in it. In the meantime, we're also gonna have this kind of seam running in the back here as well. That might get hidden by the seats, but just for all intents and purposes, we're gonna use T.M.S.C extra thin to, again, bond the two together, and then hopefully that kind of action will help kind of close that gap up, and then if need be, that we can also go ahead and use some Bondic as well to kind of fill that in. So we'll just take a generous amount of extra thin and place it in the gap there. Capillary reaction is going to kind of take care of the rest. It's going to flow into the rest of the corners. Press that nice down and tight. And what we can also do is kind of go on the back side here, where nobody's going to see. And we'll just apply more extra thin into there. And strengthen that joint up. And we'll set that off to side for later. That looks like it's hunkering down well. There's almost like I can barely feel the gap there now, which is good. So again, that's going to be a minimal amount of cleanup work for us to do there. Again, it's not really a part that's going to be, noticed that much. But if we can clean it up, if anybody's really going to judge it and look at it, then at least we know that it's nice and clean and spotless in there. But very minimal cleanup work. We don't need to go super ham on it to clean it up completely, because the wheels will be in the wheel well and it'll cover it up, but we'll just try and get it as clean as possible. And so with that, guys, we're going to go ahead and end this portion of the build progress. We're going to go and hopefully get into the spray booth soon and get some of the base colors put on, and work on the engine detail, which is kind of like the next big step as far as the instructions here. We've got the engine going in. We have a ton of photo etch detail that we need to add onto there, and then we've got the headlights and the rest of it all going in. So we'll probably end up doing the engine first, the interior second, suspension we'll do third, and then after that, then we'll be able to go ahead with the body installation. So again, guys, thanks for watching. If you have any comments or concerns, let me know in the comments below. Check out the rest of our pages. Those are also in the description. And again, thanks for watching. Have a good night, and we'll see you soon.